Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is John Newell, and I am the Service Associate today. Before we begin, please check to make sure your microphone is muted. You may also turn off your camera if your image is potentially distracting. Please also be mindful of your speech while on Zoom, as microphones can accidentally become unmuted. This will minimize any disruption for our service. You will notice the closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to turn that off or on, find the CC option on your Zoom toolbar and select the up arrow to access it. Thanks so much for your cooperation. This is now the time for transition, from ordinary time to sacred time. Time to check in with your body, to collect your attention, to be present in this moment. Let this moment be separated from yesterday and from tomorrow. May this virtual space become a sanctuary for the next hour. Allow your screen to transform the place you are into a virtual community hall. May this virtual service be holy time for each of us that joins us together in the celebration of life. Our prelude is Rise Up Women by Theodora Mills. Theodora was a suffragist who wrote this to support the marches and rallies that the suffragists were holding at that time. It will be presented by Alyssa Yeager.
We gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community.
Next, we will sing a unison song. The words will appear on the screen. Please join in singing Just as Long as I Have Breath by Johann Ebeling. Lyrics by Alicia Carpenter. We will be led by Alyssa Yeager. Welcome to our viewers from Facebook, who will be joining us now for our service. This morning, we welcome to our service Dr. Sigrin Newell. Sigrin has been a member of this congregation for about 40 years. After graduating from Antioch College, she volunteered for the U.S. Peace Corps and spent 2 years in Ecuador. She was instrumental in getting the state to convert the Del Mar Game Farm to the Five Rivers Environmental Education Center. Once that was running well, she joined the Friends of Thatcher Park, becoming its president, secretary, and lately, newsletter writer. She has now retired from a career as professor of education at Walden University. She's the mother of 2 sons and grandmother of 3 granddaughters and a grandson. Today, she will share the 14th sermon she has delivered from this pulpit.
A few weeks ago, the Reverend Richard Gilbert talked to us about engaged spirituality. Today, I would like to tell you about a dynamic woman who exemplifies this way of being in the world. In the 1800s, Olympia Brown grew up in a world in which everyone thought that women could not be ministers. Yet this stubborn idealist persisted to become one of the first American women to be ordained by a major denomination. The Northern Universalist Association in Malone, New York, affirmed her in the ministry in 1863. However, no one would hire a woman minister. The Reverend Brown finally found work in congregations that were so down and out that they had no choice but to hire a woman. In each of 3 cases, she turned derelict congregations into thriving, financially successful institutions. Having had to fight so hard to achieve her dream, Reverend Brown became involved with the suffragists. She befriended Susan B. Anthony and embarked on a lifelong series of lectures and organizing for the cause. Olympia and one other woman were the only 2 of the initial suffragists to live long enough to cast their votes. Olympia was 84 when she voted for the first time. She lived another 6 years and went on to be a founding member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. As we join in the celebration of life, may we celebrate the Reverend Olympia Brown and follow her example of spiritual activism.
After World War I, the suffragists were impatient to finally win the vote. They turned to President Woodrow Wilson for support in getting Congress to pass the suffragist amendment. He responded that, quote, he had more important things on his mind than placating a handful of noisy, demanding women. Wilson went to France to be part of the Paris peace talks. On the day that he was received in Paris, the suffragists lit a great fire in Lafayette Park and burned all of Wilson's books on liberty, freedom, and democracy. This action was an acute embarrassment to the president, who eventually changed his mind and supported the women's right for the vote. An eyewitness reported it was late afternoon when the 400 women proceeded solemnly in single file from headquarters, past the White House, along the edge of the quiet and beautiful Lafayette Park, to the foot of Lafayette's statue. A slight mist added beauty to the pageant. The purple, white, and gold banners, so brilliant in sunshine, became soft pastel sails. Half the procession carried lighted torches, the other half banners. The crowd gathered silently, somewhat awestruck by the scene. A torch was applied to the pine wood logs and the Grecian urn at the edge of the broad base of the statue. As the flames began to mount, there was a short speech telling the crowd why the women were burning Wilson's words. The few hoots and jeers which followed all ceased when a tiny and aged woman stepped from her place to the urn in the brilliant torchlight. The crowd recognized a veteran. It was the most dramatic moment in the ceremony. Reverend Olympia Brown of Wisconsin, one of the first ordained women ministers in the country, then in her 84th year, gallant pioneer, friend and colleague of Susan B. Anthony, said, as she threw into the flames the speech made by the president on his arrival in France, quote, "America has fought for France and the common cause of liberty. I have fought for liberty for 70 years, and I protest against the president's leaving our country with this old fight unwon." The crowd burst into applause and continued to cheer as she was assisted from the plinth of the statue, too frail to dismount herself.
Let us begin at the beginning. Olympia Brown was born in 1835 in a tiny log cabin in Schoolcraft, Michigan. Her parents had walked 800 miles from Vermont to Michigan next to a wagon piled with their goods. In spite of its name, there was no school in Schoolcraft. For the first several years, Olympia's mother homeschooled Olympia and her siblings. Besides reading, writing, and arithmetic, her mother taught the children the basic tenets of her Universalist faith. From the very beginning, Olympia believed that salvation is extended to all human beings, that God is kind and loving, not angry and vengeful, and that there is no such place as hell. These beliefs were a great contrast to the hellfire and brimstone evangelists of the day, who preached the sinful nature of all human beings. As they grew, Olympia and her sister learned that their mother would not ask them to help with household chores if they were studying. Accordingly, the two girls developed a great fondness for books. When Olympia was 19, she and her 17-year-old sister traveled to Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts for more education. When they enrolled, they were required to classify themselves as professing Christians, hopefully pious, or hopeless. Professing Christians believed in an angry God and tried to convert anyone who didn't agree. Since this was completely at odds with the Universalist teachings of her mother, Olympia resisted. She searched the Bible for any mention of Christ's teachings about hell and couldn't find any. With encouragement from her mother's letters, Olympia continued to resist conversion. Her faith held steady. At the end of the year, Olympia and her sister returned home, but Olympia wanted more education. Fortunately, her father encouraged her to keep searching till she found a school where there would be no religious instruction on the students, imposed on the students. At age 20, Olympia went to Antioch College. Its founder, Horace Mann, believed in education for women. It was a very liberal school for its time. But even here, Olympia found discrimination against women. For example, one day, the English instructor said that the next assignment would be orations. All the men would stand in front of the class and give speeches. The young women should bring manuscripts and read from them. When the day came, Olympia walked to the front of the class with her manuscript in her hand, and she never looked at it once. She had memorized the oration. The faculty, thrown into confusion, did not know what to do. Olympia insisted that she had done nothing wrong. She said, "I did the same assignment as the men did. Women can speak as well as men. Our minds are no different." From that day forward, she never read a manuscript before the class. As she struggled with such discrimination, Olympia began to write essays about equality of the sexes. All the guest lecturers invited to speak on campus were men. Olympia listened to Ralph Waldo Emerson, Horace Greeley, and other famous writers. When she asked why there weren't any women, her professors responded, "There are no women speakers comparable to the men we have selected." So Olympia gave them a list of well-known women, but they were adamant, "We can't consider a woman. Who would come to hear her?" So Olympia and her friends organized a committee to bring women to speak. They raised money to bring the Reverend Antoinette Brown to campus. Antoinette had completed a course in theology at Oberlin College, but Oberlin refused to ordain her. Finally, she found a church that would hire and ordain her, but she was never recognized as a minister by any denomination. The Reverend Antoinette Brown gave an excellent speech on Saturday and a sermon the next morning, both of which drew large crowds. From this success, Olympia began to ponder the idea that she might become a minister. After she graduated from Antioch, Olympia went back home to live with her family. In 1860, a former schoolmate invited Olympia to come to Cleveland, Ohio for the Christmas holidays. When she got there, Olympia found out that her friend's mother was circulating a property rights petition addressed to the Ohio State Legislature. It asked that married women be allowed to control their own inherited property, control their own earnings, and the guardianship of their children. Rights that we take for granted today. The very next day, Olympia started collecting signatures. On the first day, she had 89 signatures. She went out again and again. She collected several hundred signatures and then went on to Columbus, Ohio to get more. Unlike today, petitions were rarely used in Olympia's day, let alone petitions by women. You went into a man's business office to ask for a signature? Shocking. Olympia and her friends pasted all the petitions into one long, continuous roll. When the day came to present the petition to the legislatures at the Ohio State Capitol, Olympia gave the roll to a senator who carefully unrolled it. The petition stretched all the way through the chamber and out into the corridor like a long white carpet. The legislators sat in stunned silence and then broke out into a cheer. The legislation was passed. By now, Olympia had decided that she wanted to become a Universalist minister. After many rejections, she was accepted at the St. Lawrence Universalist Theological School in Canton, New York. Tuition was free, and board cost $2.25 a week. At St. Lawrence, Olympia found that the faculty were supportive, but the faculty wives created problems for her. Some of them were openly hostile to the idea of a woman becoming a minister. Although she was tiny, only weighing 90 pounds, Olympia's air of determination generated respect. She wore it like a cloak. Over time, several of the faculty wives became sympathetic and helped her to succeed. Two students were particularly difficult. They would get beneath her window and mimic her soft, high-pitched voice. This was particularly painful because she knew they were right. She had to do something so her voice could be heard in the back of a church long before the invention of microphones. She found an elocution instructor and learned how to lower her voice and make her words more understandable. Once she learned this, she continued to practice throughout her life. Olympia's great niece remembers that even when she was 84 years old, her great aunt would go into the garden and boom, They toiled and moiled and boiled the boy and found no joy. The children were terrified. While she was in theology school, the Civil War had begun. At St. Lawrence, many male students were actively working to get rights for Negro men. They were appalled at the idea of rights for Negro women. Just 7 years later, in 1868, the 14th Amendment was passed. This gave Black men the vote, but excluded Black women. This was 52 years before all women finally got the vote. When Olympia graduated from St. Lawrence, she faced a great deal of opposition to her ordination. Eventually, the Northern Universalist Association of Malone, New York, agreed to take the risk. Olympia was ordained on June 25th, 1863, thus becoming the second woman to become ordained as a minister by a major denomination. Another woman, Lydia Ann Jenkins, had been ordained by the Ontario, New York Association of Universalists in 1860. Unfortunately, all of Reverend Jenkins' papers were burned in a fire, so not much is known about her. Then began the grueling task of finding a church that would hire her. Olympia was rejected again and again, but kept her determination strong. She got a job at Weymouth Landing, Massachusetts, near Boston. The church was in such terrible shape that no man was willing to take the job. She stayed there for 5 years. Under her leadership, the church thrived. During these years, Olympia also began to spend more time with suffragists Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. The three of them gave many speeches in favor of women's equality. In 1867, there were 2 amendments to the Kansas Constitution that were to be put before the voters. One would give Negro men the vote, and the second would give women the vote. Olympia was asked to travel to Kansas to give speeches in favor of these amendments. When she got to Kansas, she had to find her own transportation, food, and lodging at each stop in this rough frontier land. In many places, there were no roads across the prairie. People just aimed in the general direction of the town they were heading for, and when they got close, they poked around until they found it. But the people were friendly and willing to put her up and take her to the next town. Olympia soon learned to ignore the discomforts of travel. She traveled and spoke 7 days a week in temperatures that were often over 100 degrees, wearing her floor-length skirt. In some pioneer homes, she only had a blanket on the floor to sleep on. A newspaper journalist described her thus: eloquent, hopeful, and brave, with religion as the basis of all her actions. In spite of her efforts and those of many others, the legislature did not pass the amendments. Olympia was crushed and seriously questioned her ability to continue. But a letter from Susan B. Anthony encouraged her to look forward and keep fighting. After the excitements of Kansas, the East Coast must have seemed tame. Over the next several years, Olympia ministered to churches in Weymouth Landing, Massachusetts, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and Racine, Wisconsin. Each time, a small, floundering congregation grew and thrived under her leadership. In 1873, Olympia married John Henry Willis. Here, I will stop to give honor to the men in her life. Their support and belief in her gifts was essential to Olympia's success. First her father, then a handful of professors, and even P.T. Barnum encouraged her. Her husband, Willis, insisted that she keep her own name and helped her every step of the way. In 1887, Olympia resigned her ministry in order to work full-time to gain the women's vote. The next 25 years were a constant round of speeches, travel, rallies, and committee meetings, successes and failures. Disappointment pierced her through when the suffragists started fighting among themselves, yet she kept on loving the cause. Finally, we come back to the dramatic moment when the frail 84-year-old Olympia burned President Wilson's speeches. This rally turned the tide. Congress approved the 19th Amendment in 1919, and the states, one by slow one, ratified them. 101 years and 4 days ago this week, the amendment became law. Votes for American women had been earned. We can never know what Olympia thought on November 2nd, 1920, when she cast her first vote. That year, Warren G. Harding defeated James Cox. Olympia must have thought back over her 70 years of religion and activism, remembering her high school insistence that girls had as much right to speak out as boys. She might have remembered practicing elocution so that she could be heard by everyone. She might have remembered her delight in finding kindred spirits in Susan B. Anthony, Carrie Chapman Catt, and others. She might have remembered her exhilaration in 1886 when she gave her first suffragist speech. Perhaps she thought about her 2 children and how proud she was that they had grown to become professors. Olympia's mind might have gone back to the incredible trip to Kansas frontier, where she gave over 300 speeches, traveling from town to town, mostly by horse and farm wagon. Olympia might have smiled at the memory of all the things said about her in the press, that she was not afraid of the sterner sex, that she was eloquent, brave, pious, and hopeful. Perhaps the praise she liked best was that she was considered troublesome. 100 years before we started speaking about good trouble, the Reverend Olympia Brown knew exactly how to use it to achieve her goals. Today, the Reverend Olympia Brown suddenly materializes here in our pulpit in Albany. Gone is the long black dress, gone is a bit of lace at the neckline and the lacy shawl. She is wearing a many-colored dress, colors that she never dared wear because she didn't feel it was appropriate for a minister. The tiny woman begins to talk to us. She is blunt and outspoken. What have you done with that vote that we worked so hard to secure? Did you elect a woman to be president? Were you able to stop the wars? How have you combined your religious faith with your activism? You say you believe in the dignity of all human beings. You say you are working to end racism. What are you doing now that actually helps real people? Is it all Sunday morning talk? I'm told that you have done some things really well. In the last presidential election, members of your congregation sent 17,000 postcards to help get out the vote. That's amazing. I'm told that you have been helping children in a local elementary school to improve their lives. I'm told that you have an active Green Sanctuary Committee and also several other committees working on social justice. These two are wonderful. And someone told me last Sunday that you heard about an African-American woman, Addie Wyatt, who was an effective advocate for workers' rights, another of my favorite causes. We started the tradition of carrying banners and protesting at the White House and at state houses around the country. How many rallies have you attended? I heard about the rally for women's rights in which the women wore pink pussy hats. That was wonderful and dramatic. Did it make a difference? There is always more work to be done. I spent my life trying to teach women to think and act for themselves. I know this is hard work, but if I can do it, you and the men working beside you can do it. Use your faith to give energy to action. Carry on my legacy.
An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution via one of the options shown on this next slide. You can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window now to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show how to label your text to indicate the amount and purpose or intent of your gift. We must now say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Facebook. Consider joining us on Zoom next time by visiting albanyuu.org. The offertory music is Standing Before Us by Carol Etzler. It will be presented by Alyssa Yeager.
Deep flowing stream,
We enjoy welcoming guests and visitors to our service. If you are a guest or a visitor and would like to tell us who you are and where you're from, you can click on the raise hand symbol. Depending upon your Zoom version, you will find the raise hand symbol either in the participant window or the reaction button on your Zoom toolbar. Our technician will invite you to unmute and introduce yourself. You may also, or instead, click on the visitor link you'll find now in the chat window. Do we have any visitors?
I'm not seeing anybody. Yeah.
Well, in any case, we welcome to all who have joined us today. If you would like to learn more about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism, you can find in the participant window someone with welcome before their name. You can reach out to that person privately in the chat window now or after the service. We welcome the chance to greet each other each Sunday. In our Zoom format, this is done through virtual breakout rooms. You can say hello and share your name. This will last a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back together.
Stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it. There is nothing in all the world so important to you as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before you the loftiest ideals, which has comforted you in sorrow, strengthened you for noble duty, and made the world beautiful. Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that we are worthy to be entrusted with this great message, that you are strong enough to work for a great true principle without counting the cost. Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyments in their contemplation, always trusting in the one God which ever lives and loves. Please join in singing our next hymn, Forward Through the Ages, music by Arthur Sullivan, words by Frederick Hosmer. It will be presented by Alyssa Yeager.
At the call divine,
Of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. As Olympia said, this faith has comforted us in sorrow, strengthened us for noble duty, and made the world beautiful. May the Reverend Olympia Brown's story touch our thoughts and hearts and give us courage to use our Unitarian Universalist beliefs to make the world a better place. Go in peace, make peace, be at peace.
This morning, we offer our thanks to our musician, Alyssa Yeager, whose marvelous tune and articulate singing is an inspiration to us all. Our pastoral care associate, Dee Van Riper, service associate, myself, John Newell. Our ushers have been Kristen Abbas, Chuck Manning, and Kathy Harris. Our welcomer was Barb Manning. Office support has been received from Tammy Hathaway and Patience Pichette. Our technical support by Reverend Sam Trumbour, and summer service coordinator, as ever, Randy Rosette. We have the following announcements this morning.